So this will be part two. Um, I was saying that industrial civilization defined the human being in too narrow a way. And so the movement to expand and unite the human species was undertaken in an unjust and in or unequal way. Um, and it amounted to a form of economic slavery in the way that we colonized, the way that the white European male colonized the rest of the planet. Um, but while this may lead us to say that we should therefore get rid of ideology, we have to recognize that that's not really possible. Um, it would amount to getting rid of the unconscious or getting rid of mythology. And myth and the unconscious, they perform a very important role. Thompson says that consciousness is what defines for us, or what plays with the boundary between noise and information. This is also what Bateson says. So what we need to do is loosen our grip on what counts as information and what doesn't, so that we can play more creatively with chaos and order and allow new things to emerge without being so conservative that we completely collapse in upon ourselves under our own dogmatic weight. So we can't get rid of ideology, we can't get rid of mythology, because as Thompson puts it, history itself is the performance of myth. As we live out our day-to-day political lives and interactions with one another as citizens, we are performing certain myths. And Thompson likens these myths or the unconscious performances that we're moving through to a horizon. And I quote Thompson, "A horizon provides an edge to our experience. If we move closer to it, it moves away. For it is not the content of our experience, but the structure of our knowing." Again, the horizon is not the content of our experience, but the structure of our knowing. And so it is with myth and history. Myth is the horizon of history. In its modality as the past, myth is the world of legend. In its modality as the future, myth is the world of prophecy and science fiction. One of the valid functions of a horizon is to put the foreground into perspective. So in other words, we can only be conscious if we move something else to the background, to the unconscious. If one sees history against a horizon of myth, one sees more than if one's nose is camping in the tent of the daily newspapers. So myth, a mythological consciousness or an awareness of myth, allows us to penetrate beneath the surface of our day-to-day interactions with one another in society. And so if we try to just repress ideology, or if we tried to get rid of it, we'd just be repressing it. We'd be pushing it into the dark, into the unconscious, where it already is. What we really want to do is make ideology more conscious. We want to understand how fresh ideas, living ideas, become these encrusted, habitual, dead ideas. So, assuming that the unconscious and that myth is here to stay, we have to reorganize consciousness such that the boundary between information and noise, again, is more permeable, is made to be more flexible. Thompson says it this way: when knowing becomes conscious of its limitations and then turns back on them to make the limited process into a dance that talks about the relationship between knowing and the unknowable, it performs being. And I'll get back to what this sense of performing being might mean towards the end of the presentation. But the point here is that we can never escape the creation of new ideologies. The German sociologist Max Weber put it this way. He recognized the movement from the charisma of the leader who comes up with the fresh revolutionary ideas the movement from that into the routinization of these ideas as this leader's followers and disciples build an institution around him and codify the ideas. A French poet, Charles Péguy, said something similar, that everything begins in mysticism and ends in politics. And we're never going to be able to transcend this cultural process, but we can become more aware of it. And in so doing, we can become more conscious of what we perform, of what we pretend. And we can begin to participate in these performances instead of just being swept along by their archetypal force. A.N. Whitehead once said that, or wrote that civilization advances by extending the number of important operations which we can perform without thinking of them. And as I'll show in a minute, Wimmer and Thompson agrees, but we cannot continue in this way if we want to survive. We've got to become more conscious of what we're doing. And so for Thompson, there have been 4 basic revolutions or transformations in the history of civilization. The first was the tribe, and after that came the agricultural society, then the industrial society, and now we're moving into the planetary society or civilization. And Thompson has a neat way of representing this. Hopefully you'll be able to see this. You can see that the tribe is at the center there, where what we have are the 4 basic personalities or roles that are played. There's the shaman, the headman, the hunter, and the clown. Now, the tribe is a small society, so each of these guys know each other quite well and understand that they each depend on one another, though they may, on the surface, appear to be in conflict. The clown makes fun of the headman. The shaman sort of sits back and explores these other dimensions, while the hunter is out there doing the grunt work. And they may not like or appreciate each other on the surface, but underneath it, they all depend on one another. Now, when we move out to the agricultural society, we have the state emerging from the headman, religion out of the shaman, art from the clown, and the military from the hunter. Now, in a similar way, each of these institutions depends on the other, though they perform different roles. And then finally, in industrial civilization, religion becomes education, the state becomes the government, military becomes industry, and art becomes media. Now, all of these, the military still exists as industry surrounds it, of course, but in this increase in complexification, the individual mind is also being fragmented, just as society becomes more and more fragmented into these larger and larger institutions. And what we're recognizing, or Thompson would argue, what we're recognizing as we shift to a planetary culture is that the individual is also, in a sense, fragmented by this process of civilizing. And, we have an ego, a self, an anima, and a shadow. And in a similar way that all of these institutions depend on one another for civilization to function, the individual depends on these different aspects of the self. The different aspects, the self, the ego, the anima, and the shadow, to function as a whole. And in the move to a planetary civilization, we have to somehow find a way to reverse this fragmentation of civilization, because it's becoming very difficult for the individual to survive amidst all these conflicting institutions, because within each of our minds is the whole of this civilizational structure, and we're being pulled in so many directions that we become schizophrenic. Now, a planetary civilization has to find a way out of this fragmentation. And in part 3, I'll try to give us at least a direction to head as far as accomplishing that goes.